Right, so we've got the start of a new project, a new month, and this month's project is portraits, for anybody that fancies having a go at portraits. I've got, if you wanted a reference photo, I've got various reference photos in this. Probably this blue folder's the best one. It's probably our blue folder. What I'd suggest is try and find an image that's a reasonable size. So that's quite a nice size. And then if I want to, I can sort of physically measure bits off. If it's too tiny, it's going to be quite awkward to see and evaluate. So that'd be the first thing. The other thing is, in the past we've done projects on sort of facial expressions and things like that, but it's going to be easier if you're just going for an image where you've got a neutral expression, just like a relaxed expression. If you've got anything with like lots of teeth, that's going to be very difficult. I won't necessarily go with that. So I'll use this one as a demo. I've also brought in various paintings. So these were all kind of done as demos at various times, mostly. So that was a painted version, sort of kind of painted tonal drawing, effectively, and same with that one. This one was obviously in colour. So I'll do a little bit on painting next week. I thought next week I think I'll use paint next week, and there's this thing called the Zorn palette that I've heard of that I've never really tried, but it's basically just using three colours. It's cadmium red, yellow ochre, and black and white. So I thought that might be interesting to try. So that's what I'll experiment with next week.
Is that acrylics?
It could be anything. It's just it could be. I think it's generally oils really, but you possibly could use watercolour. I'm not sure really. So that would be something to play around with next week. And then I think the following week I'll use pastels. Try something with pastels. I might keep it to a 3-week project, or if we want a bit longer, we'll do 4. I thought maybe have some longer projects and shorter projects this year, just see how that goes. Okay, so when I'm in terms of drawing, if I'm drawing a portrait, I usually just have a little think about roughly where I want the person's head to be. So I would keep it quite, just quite light. Use either maybe a different colour, like I've got pastel, this orange pastel pencil. So this is good for setting out, just getting an idea of everything's going to be. Or you could just draw lightly using charcoal or pencil. In this case, she's reasonably square on to us. I think we may be seeing slightly more of this side of the face than that, but it's a fairly square on photo. But that's something to be aware of. Sometimes you'll have an image where we're seeing a lot of the side of the face, and then it's sort of like a 3/4 view. This is the simplest, really, kind of straightforward. What I look for is almost like a kind of line of symmetry through the features. And if you use any of my images, I don't mind if it helps to just make some lines on there. That's fine. So in this case, she's very slightly got her head tilted, and it's just slightly this side. So I'm thinking something a little bit like that. There's a line of symmetry through the middle of the features. Then the next thing to look for is where her eye level would be. And generally your eye level, if you've got a square on, straight on, same level portrait, it's going to be about halfway between your chin and the top of the skull. So again, I could measure that with my pencil. So from the middle of her eyes to her chin is just slightly under halfway. So thinking about there would be about where her eyes would be. So that's how I tend to, that's the thinking. Even if I go straight in with drawing shapes, that underlying thinking is, I'm always looking for those relationships. So actually drawing them out, and particularly if you're working maybe a drawing or a painting over a whole session or a couple of weeks or something like that, you might as well do all this, get all the guidelines in. Once I'm there, I try and think roughly where the eye on this side is going to be. And I'm right-handed, so for me it makes sense to draw here, and then I can work over here. I'm not smudging what I've worked on, but I can also see these bits in relation to what I'm drawing. So I'll start there. I start with the inside of the top eyelid. So that's what I find a good place to start. Now the other thing to look for is, obviously we've got this centre line where the eyes would be. And so if say that's where her eyes are going to be, you can also look at sort of corner to corner and see if there's any angle there. So in this case, somebody's used this image before and drawn a ruled line through here, through this corner. But if you look close, if you have a look up in a minute, the corners of the eyes are slightly higher. So they're very slightly angling up, a bit like that. So that's just something to be aware of, and if you can look for that in the first place. So if I'm at the corner of her eye here, if I just sort of maybe do a little guideline of where I want it to start and finish, again, that can help. And then from there, I'm just going to have a look at that shape. It's coming up like that, and pretty much straight. It feels like quite an even arc, that one. Quite often it won't be. I know, quite a lot of people, it might sort of go up a bit like that and then down like that. There's all sorts of shapes to look for. So that'd be that bit. The next thing I'm going to look for is the pupil and the iris and the white of the eye. So how much of the white of the eye I can see from here to here, how much of the pupil and the iris from here to here, and then how much of the white of the eye again. So just marking those positions, perhaps to start with, just kind of make a mark, roughly those spacings. So as I say, we've got the eyelid there, the pupil and the iris. So if you've got like the pupil and the iris, that would be the pupil and the iris. The top, in this case, the top of her eyelid is sort of eclipsing the top of the pupil, and just almost just clipping the bottom. It's not really covering it particularly, but just a tiniest bit. So I would start with getting that shape in, like that. So I'll draw a complete bit there. This bit I'm going to leave, and then I could then, you've actually got quite big pupils, must be quite a darkened room. So in there. Where there's a highlight, I can just leave a little gap. There's a tiny highlight there, so maybe just gently show that in. And I find it helps to put things like that, the pupils and the iris, in fairly early. And then the bottom eyelid, as I say, you just need to get that to go up to there. And this one, it goes up a bit and then it levels out, I think, as it comes into the tear duct. So that's the sort of shape I'm seeing for the eye. I'm also seeing there's a continuous line over the top of the eyelid. So I can see that almost like complete shape across here, which to me is a little bit wider here than it is here. So again, I need to just try and take that into account, just thin this down. I think I probably should have shot on a pencil. So if I clunky bit to draw it. So that would be that eye. Next bit I want to do is kind of work my way across like the bridge of the nose. So the first bit, there's a bit of shadow there. So I need to kind of mark in where that's going to be, roughly, and then a highlight, and then a bit of shadow again. And I need to get an idea of the spacing between her eyes. Okay, so, I can measure it with my pencil and compare. I've also got these, we've got a couple of pairs of these dividers. If anybody wants to borrow these. Again, if you've got a decent sized photograph, it's quite useful. You can then make precise measurements. So if I'm measuring that, so I'm going from the corner of the white of the eye, just the corner of the tear duct, and comparing that to the gap between her eyes, and it's just over an eye's width. So whatever I've drawn here, I need to make sure that I'm just going slightly wider than that. So again, I'll do the corresponding position. So that'd be an eye's width. So I think about there, start just a slightly wider.
Can you use a ruler as well for?
You could use a ruler, yeah. You could, if you wanted to do it absolutely by the millimetre, you could use a mirror.
It's not really a straight line.
Yeah. These are quite handy, or even if you've got like a compass with a pencil in it or something like that. Anything like that is quite good for doing that. Again, that's my general direction line, and then, so that's where I want to start, and I'll just get a line coming up. I'd expect her eyes to be about the same size here, but if it was, as I say, somebody, you know, like if I was using that image, you know, his eye on this side is going to be a lot narrower than on that side, because this side is a lot squarer onto me, whereas the other side is kind of going around the corner. Okay. So yeah, just actually I'll just go with this. So that's, just do a couple of guide, make a mark there. That's basically what I'm aiming at. Then it's the same process again. So I'll just pop that in very quickly. It's important to make sure that these line up. I mean, I did have somebody draw in the week, and we had one eye there and the other one sort of up here. So you need to make sure that these points are related. Sometimes this might be, you know, in effect it might be more of a curve than a straight line. So that's why I tend to do it freehand rather than do rule lines. But actually ruling the line on there does make it quite clear what's missing. Right, so I'll just pop that in. That's coming up here and should end about there. Again, white of the eye, pupil in the iris, and then bottom eyelid, something like that. Just put a little bit of shadow in there. And then the top of the, it might actually come up a bit higher than that. Top of the eyelid there, something like that. These shadows are worth getting in as well. So get a little bit of this. Or even just sort of drawing the shapes of the shadows helps with your kind of guideline. You could, in terms of the eyebrows, you know, have a look at the depth from here to here. It's at least as deep as the eye, her eye. So I think her eyebrows are going to start about there. Looking at this corner in relation to here, probably starting about there. I think she's been plucking her eyebrows. So something like that for her eyebrows, and then the same sort of thing on the other side. That's a little bit lower there. And you know, sometimes actually drawing a shape around what you can see first, rather than trying to just draw individual hairs, can be a good way of working. Working down, need to try and find the length of a nose and the where her nostrils and nose, the bottom part of her nose is in relation to her eyes. So we've got this line here. If we drew parallel line up to there like that, that is just pretty much just to the right or just to the left of the tear duct. I think, yep. So I can do the same on my sketch. That's about where I'm expecting her nostrils to come in. To get the length, again, perhaps just check from, yeah, do a measurement. So from where the tear duct is, I can then compare that with something here. It's not a very easy one though. Maybe I'll do it with the depth, that might be easier. So the depth of that, 1, 2, perhaps about three times the depth of her eye. So it's what, either check the width against the length. So whatever I've got here, 1, 2, 3, I think that's about where her nose is going to be. The other thing you can look at is, and that I sometimes look for is, and I do this when I'm drawing people from observation more, because you can't really start measuring things when you're drawing directly from a model. So I look at these angles, I think, well, what sort of angle is there between the corner of the eye and the side of the nose? So that's one way of judging the, you know, how long the nose would be. And then it's basically just pop it in, see how it looks then. So that's going to be there. Let's do that with a darker pencil. Just feels a bit wide, but I don't know, I'd have to just check that I haven't made any mistake somewhere. And then in this case, I can see a little bit of the shadow of her nostrils there, something like that, and then that just curls round, something like that. So it's quite soft. And this, you're going to be, it's just really light and shadow to create a sense of where the nose is coming out. It's just where the nose catches the light. shows that. Obviously the skin tone is the same throughout really. Once you're there and you're happy with that, and I'm not sure I am happy with that, but if I had time to fiddle about with it, I'm then going to look at this distance here. And I usually go like from here to where her lips meet, or actually from here to the top of the lip. So we can look at that and compare that with something that we've drawn around the eye. And so that's that. That's it's about that much. It's sort of not quite at the end of the iris, but it's about there. So again, I'll mark that. So that's where her top lip is going to be. And to me, she's got a reasonable amount of space there. Some people it's quite tight. I usually draw that. Sometimes there's like a little bow shape. It's very subtle. You could then look at how deep her lips are, how much space there is to the top lip, how much to the bottom lip. The bottom lip's usually a bit deeper. And I think in this case her bottom lip is a little bit deeper. So that's where her lips are going to meet. Then looking at the corner of her mouth, and again, drawing parallel to what we've got already, it's just, where would that be coming in? Just about the colour of the eye, where the colour of the eye starts on that side, and just inside the colour of the eye on this side. So again, just popping some guidelines, that helps me to get to there. And then what I usually draw next is this line where the lips meet. So if I just have that, because if somebody's smiling, this might be up here, you might have something like that. Obviously it's a neutral expression. I'd say it's fairly straight across, so I just want something fairly sort of square to this, there'll be a slight angle because of that. Then I'll draw, just follow that shape round. It's dipping down a tiny bit, there, and then up again. And then once I've got that, I can then just try and complete the shapes. It's actually quite hard to see really, but I think that's something like what we've got. There's a little bit of shadow under the bottom lip usually, and you usually find that the bottom lip will be a little bit lighter. Perhaps the top lip might be in a little bit of shadow, just because of it's pretty subtle with this particular photograph. So something like that. See? From there, I want to draw the outside of the face. So this is roughly where I wanted to work, but I then will look at things like the space between here and here, and that is quite wide. That looks like at least an eye's width. Yep. So that's about an eye's width across there. So that's the side of where her cheekbone would be. On this side, I know it's just slightly narrower because so it's just slightly under an eye's width there, just because of the angle of her head. But she's quite broad across her cheekbone, so that'll be that position, I think, something like that. And then that can go up to a hairline. Things like a forehead. You could compare that with something else. I don't know, maybe. Yeah, that's about the same as mouth to eye level, I think. So I think that's about where her hairline is coming in. And then her parting, that's roughly in line with the corner of the eye. So it's basically kind of relating what you're drawing back to where you started. Really. That's how I tend to approach it. And then her chin, just checking the length of the chin. Again, that's about just slightly over an eye's width. So think about there for that. The next thing I tend to look for is, swap pencils, I'm running out. It's like where a jaw comes down and then changes direction. So there's a point at which it sort of curves, and in this case, it's roughly level with her mouth. So if we take that out, that's roughly, what I'll be aiming. And this tapers down a little bit, something like that. And then that will turn, and hopefully that will kind of line up there. So that's how I go about getting that shape. Then where her ears are, I basically would just relate that across to roughly about there to the bottom. The top is sort of about here. So I can do the same on the other side. That's roughly where her ears will be. I can't see much of her ears. Can then go for the shape of her hair, both sides, and then her neck. Same sort of thing. Just looking at where her neck is in relation to features. That's more or less about there in relation to her eye. On this side, a bit further over, about here. So she's probably got her chest at a slightly different angle to her head. I think that's about where that's coming in. Like that. So it's basically working the middle, working my way out, roughing it out to start with, outside in to start with, and then inside out. So that's how I draw portraits. The other thing I thought might be quite nice, maybe not this week, but another week, maybe we do some quick sketches as well. Perhaps sit with and draw each other. 10 minutes each or something like that. Maybe do that next week. That's another thing you can do. Yeah, you don't have to show each other.
Yeah.
But I thought that might be quite good. Just to get a little bit of experience sketching people from life as well. Has anybody got any? So yeah, if you've got sketchbooks, bring them along. That will be. Anybody got any questions?
You start with the eyes.
Crystal clear. Sorry.
You start with the eyes.
Yeah, I do. I always start here. And even if you're a little sketch, I'll show you one of the little sketches.
Yeah.
Got one.
Yeah, and she's
So if I draw, if I'm out and about and I'm sketching people, so like something like that is people on the tube, but I would start with the eyes, start with their eyes, and then just work my way through. So it's exactly the same sort of process. Yeah, just start with features. I find is the easiest. Okay. All good. Yeah. So if you fancy that, there's some images here if you wanted to use any of mine. Yep.